Hello and welcome to the Scuttlebutt Podcast, the show for current and former service members looking to make better decisions, think deeper, and earn more money. My name is Brock Briggs, and each week I do that by bringing you a conversation with a badass veteran at the top of their craft. Today you're hearing my conversation with Rodney Adams. Rodney is a former Marine Corps infantry, both enlisted and officer, and is now the CEO and founder of Mr. Home Repair of Tulsa. We get into why the title of veteran means different things to different people and the good and bad application of it in the workplace. We talk about his journey from his time working at Goldman Sachs Investment Management arm to becoming an entrepreneur. We also get into what it takes to succeed operating a small and medium business and some very potent advice for young men pursuing a similar path. Don't forget, you can always check out this episode, transcripts, the YouTube channel, and newsletter where I dive deeper on each episode every week, all at scuttlebuttpodcast.co. Please enjoy this conversation with Rodney Adams. One of the things that you were just saying was that you think that the veteran space is played out. What exactly do you mean by that?
I think I have maybe a little bit of a different approach than what you might see online or kind of in the public. But I kind of get nauseated by all of the veteran stuff that's out there. You know, there's a big number of us that just wanted to serve and do our part and, do good work with good guys. And, in the days after even the initial invasion, it's like every initiative in the world started popping up to support veterans. And I think that's a good thing. I've lived in a country that was not that way. I lived in Western Europe for a couple of years as one of my assignments. And the country I lived in, the general idea was that you were a military service member if you couldn't get a better job. And so I'm really grateful to live in a country that supports, war fighters. But I will say that I've never really been into the whole, like, what's the craziest experience you've ever had kind of thing. I can't stand going to a party with, non-veterans or anybody for that matter. And kind of like, oh, have you ever killed anybody, or what's the craziest thing you've ever done? Like, I just don't like that. Not because I had a terrible experience or I'm bitter about my service or anything for that matter. There's literally nothing about my service that keeps me awake at night. I'm very grateful and fortunate in that regard, but I just don't like talking about it. I think there's far more interesting stuff out there. And I think similar to maybe the World War II guys coming home, now we've seen over decades of them living their lives afterward. There's a lot of value that they added to just being dads, to just being business owners, to being, leaders in their church, whatever it may be. And so to me, how someone who has had a formative, unique experience in their life goes about living the normal parts that everybody else has to deal with is interesting to me. That's more fascinating than, what's the craziest thing you ever saw and wherever. So anyway, I realize that's maybe an odd approach, but I just think the whole veterans deal can be a little bit of a corporate virtue signal from time to time as well. It's not much different than a lot of these, affinity groups that corporate America tries to shove down their employees' throats. They do it because they want attention, and they do it because they want to seem like a good company or the right kind of place. And they've put veterans on a pedestal that they themselves benefit from. And so I'm not bitter about it, but after a while, you just kind of get tired of talking about it. I like meeting other guys that have had experiences similar to mine. I'm very proud of my service. I had a great time in the Marine Corps, and I love all the dudes that I'm still in contact with. But I also have a life that is normal, like everybody else's, and I like my life, and it's interesting as well.
What do you think that brings that on? Like you mentioned that there's maybe some virtue signaling from corporations, and maybe you're referring there to like, hey, we hire vets and do this. Is that what you're referring to? And then maybe on an individual level, what do you think spurs people's desire to be obsessed with that? I'm not exactly sure what other way to put that.
Yeah, I don't totally know. I think particularly in corporate America, I think we're always trying to align ourselves with things or people that seem good or that the public broadly supports, or we're always trying to associate our image with images that are broadly accepted by the culture. And so look back to the Wounded Warrior stuff, back when they kind of had their little heyday. Obviously, by the end of it, they were squandering money and just doing ridiculous things. But co-branding with all these consumer products and putting their little symbol on all this stuff, like, I mean, that absolutely benefited, all these consumer packaged goods groups to have veteran stuff like on their products during a time of war. Like they were absolutely benefiting from that. And I think that doesn't bother me. It doesn't make me bitter or anything. I think let's all just be honest about the fact that there are supporting veterans and supporting all these other groups that society has sort of boxed together and supports, from a social perspective, is not a bad thing. I think a lot of people do it with a good heart in mind, but it is profitable too. Like, let's not pretend it's not. Like, it is profitable to be aligned with groups and brands and people and images that the public broadly supports. And so the second that, well, now that we're talking about it, it'd be interesting to go back and see during like Vietnam, like how many corporations put, veteran related things on their packages, because the war was not so popular and the veterans themselves were not so popular. And I'd be curious to know how much signaling was being done by corporate America selling, goods during that time. And I truly don't know. I could be totally wrong, but let's just be honest about the fact that I'm proud of my service. I love the guys that I've met, and I have no problem with people hiring vets because they're vets. I think vets are great hires for the most part, because no matter how high you've climbed in the ranks, you have been trained well, you've been led, you've had to lead, and you've had to learn to follow, like all things that are really important to being a productive member of society. And so trust me, like if you apply for a job with my company and you're a veteran, like my ears are going to perk up, because there's a good chance that you and I speak the same language and there's some common understanding of just discipline and good work. And so I have no problem with it, but let's also not pretend that it's not a big virtue signal for a lot of corporations to just put veteran stuff on their packages. It's profitable. And that's part of it too.
I'd never heard that pitch before, but I think you make a good point. And I would also be curious to know about the branding during different periods of war and what that looked like. If I were to kind of speculate on what it looks like now, it seems like that there has been some sort of line drawn there between we support the troops and the people. Nobody wants to be seen as somebody who doesn't, for exactly some of the reasons that you just listed. But on the flip side, some of those same organizations are very vocal and damning of like the war in Iraq and what we've been doing for the last 20 years, rightfully or wrongfully.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure.
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, but you see it all over, right? Like, let's not divide the groups from each other. You've got various initiatives in corporate America. You might have, you see it with women's, rights issues. You see it with racial stuff. You see it with sexual orientation stuff. That with the veteran thing it's all the same thing, right? Like the people are not the same, the issues are not the same, but I think there are good-hearted people that are behind some of these brands that do want to extend a hand or align themselves with these communities in a good way, like a good-natured way, and that's okay. But let's also not pretend like if any one of these communities fell out of public favor, that they would just keep on branding them. It's not profitable to align your company with an unpopular social initiative. And so to me, and I'm not trying to make this a bigger deal than it is, but to me, I just think that there's a little bit of acknowledgement that could be made there, particularly people like us. I mean, we're veterans. Let's not pretend that it was good for Goldman Sachs to hire me, not because of my big brain, but because I was a veteran during a time when they were running veterans initiatives. But that benefited me too, because I got a job at a place I probably wouldn't have got a job at.
You might be selling yourself short there. And that is interesting though. And I have gone through this same kind of journey of trying to understand like what exactly this means. And there are a lot of, this is a conversation, a mental conversation that everybody I think goes through after service. And this is what they don't talk about, is like how hard do you want to lean into it? Because you, on one side of the coin, you can really lean in and kind of take advantage of, because as you said, that there's abundant resources and there's all of these things out there, and you can really suck a lot of those systems dry. Or you can go the complete opposite side of the coin and basically never acknowledge your service and say, yeah, that happened, and never bring it up. And I don't know, probably the perfect balance might be somewhere in between.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think as far as the service member goes, it's kind of on them. They can live the life that they want to live. If they don't want to, they want to box up all their stuff and put it in the attic and never talk about it again, that's their prerogative, and that's totally fine. I think for me, I would, not that it's any of my business, but if I were talking to somebody like that, I'd just want to make sure that they were healthy and okay, and had it, had the outlets that they needed to talk about stuff, and they're not just completely suppressing some dark stuff. But as long as they're fine with it and they just don't really want to deal with, they just don't really want to deal in the public with their time of service, they'd rather move on, then fine, that's up to them.
You were talking a few minutes ago about vets being good hires. Generally, you said that they make good leaders, they make good followers. You had a really poignant point in another interview I listened that you did, and you said something to the effect of that the military teaches us a lot about leadership, but light in the way of kind of a soft, or like the tangible skill that you need to do a job. So like somebody that at 18 goes off to university and gets a degree, they're going to graduate with some actual kind of skills in a particular area, and then grow their leadership experience over time. Whereas somebody in the military might not have that skill at the end of the 4 years, or at least that's tangible to the job that they get, but they have that leadership experience with people, and they're a little bit more rounded in their kind of leadership development, I guess you might say.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say as far as the veteran hiring thing, I would say if your resume has a time of service on it, then I'm probably going to automatically move you to the interview stage, just because you at least have shown that you can raise your hand and take responsibility, and you've gone through hard things, and you've developed a common language that I probably understand. Now, then I'm probably going to be more hard on you in the interview phase, because I also know that there's a lot of waste and dead weight in the military. If you can coast in the military. Like there's a lot of coasting middle management that make full 20-year careers that never intended to be productive. They just get orders to duty station, and they're middle performers because they can be, because the system rewards mediocrity in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of exceptional warfighters out there for sure, but you're not automatically punching your ticket to being a high capacity individual just because you join the military, but it will get you an interview, for me anyway. I don't know how other people feel, but then after that, I'm going to go through your resume, and I know how to read a resume, and I know when you're just telling me what your job description was versus what you actually produced while you were there. And so I want to see someone who showed up to their duty station and actually outperformed, as opposed to, anybody can put on how much money and equipment you were responsible for, or, the worst lieutenants I've ever met were still responsible for the same number of guys I was. So you put that on a resume, that doesn't mean that you're great. It just means that you had a big responsibility. And so that's sort of how I feel about hiring. As far as the skills thing goes, to me, there is a big tension here, because the military is not a community service organization, and the number one responsibility of our fighting force is readiness, mission readiness, winning battles. That's what we do. So it's not really their job to make sure that I know how to value real estate or weld or, do some other task in order to set me up for success outside of the military. But the flip side of that coin is, being in the military, you're making a sacrifice by taking yourself off the field, out of the hiring pool, out of normal society, and concentrating in an area that isn't useful in most places. I was an infantryman. Almost nothing I did has any value in civil society. I have to translate everything, right? Like everything has to be filtered and translated. And not everybody has the ability to do that or the time. I've been fortunate enough to, I got a job pretty much right out of my service, and they hired me knowing that I was not coming in as the best investment banker or investment manager. I had to learn, but they gave me that chance. And so I had to bust my tail to kind of get up the curve. So I don't know what the responsibility of the military is in order to get those people those skills. I would say, if going back to our earlier conversation, if you're all about hiring vets, hire vets. And then, there's companies out there, GE is one of them. There's other ones. There's a bunch of them probably by now that have built pipelines specifically for veterans, where they hire you knowing that you're made of the kind of stuff that they want you to be made of. And then they'll train you to do the other stuff. And you usually have a 2 or 3 year period where you're kind of learning the ropes. I think that's a fantastic way to hire veterans. Takes the burden off the military to have to kind of train you to get you to fly the nest. But then also you've got like 2 years to underperform and sink or swim. Ultimately, learn what you need to learn to be successful, or don't. But at least you had a chance. And I think those are great programs, the companies that do it.
To your earlier point about there being people that coast to 20, that's probably one of my hot takes. There was this funny Twitter thing circulating around, and it was like, what's your hot take about the military that will get everybody riled up on here? And mine was that it feels as if there are more kind of mediocre performers in the military than there is comparatively to the rest of the community, because you're relatively shielded from real negative outcomes. And as you pointed out, the incentives are just not there. It's, we've got this carrot at the end of the stick, and if you can just make it to 20, then you've got this waiting for you. You said that there's, did you have a comment about that?
I mean, I agree with it. There's absolutely high performers in the military, but they're usually the ones that have a sense of duty, and to the degree that they know they could be doing something else, but they choose the limitations of being in the military, the pay, the structure, whatever that may be, because it's what they want to do. But they could totally be somewhere else doing other things. I've met a bunch of them. There are totally a bunch of high performers out there. That said, the promotion and retention system rewards mediocrity. It doesn't reward the top 5%. It rewards the middle band, however big that is. And so I think just as you increase in rank, the top performers start to sort of offboard and head out to the civilian life, and the mediocre performers sort of keep getting promoted. They keep getting more money. They get a new duty station. Whatever mistakes they made or laziness that manifested in one assignment completely goes away, and they get to start over in a completely different assignment. And before you know it, you've done 20 years. And so I do not mean to say that everybody who does 20 years is mediocre at all. On the flip side, particularly in the officer ranks, I'd have to think a little bit about the enlisted ranks. I was enlisted before I was an officer, but not for long. But for the officer side, once you kind of hit the rank of major, I don't know what that is in the Air Force and the Navy. I guess it would be a lieutenant commander in the Navy, a major in the Army and the Marine Corps, at least the 04 level. You kind of start getting to the point where you're not super marketable in the civilian world at a high professional level. Like, you kind of get yourself to a place where defense contracting, doing something in the national capital region is probably where you're going to end up. And so I feel for those guys, because they might end up being high performers, but when you're 45 and looking for your first real job outside of the military, that's a hard sell for a lot of companies. The young officers young officers are great. Junior military officers, I think JMO is what they used to call them, the lieutenants and the young captains. It's a great time to transition. 04, 05, 06 is probably a lot harder if you want to do something outside of defense contracting or something like that. So anyway, I agree with you. The system rewards mediocrity, but I also tend to think that over time, even the high performers, once you make it long enough, it just doesn't make sense to try to leave before you do your 20. Like once you've done 17, why not do 20? You know what I mean?
There certainly is the cutoff, and even earlier on, that discussion is being had. People make that justification after 4 years enlistment. They're like, well, I'm a quarter of the way there. It's happening from very early on, even.
And by the way, I used to have an issue with sort of people kind of staying just for the benefits, but as I've gotten older and I've been out for a while, I don't really care anymore. Like if you're particularly in the enlisted ranks or in the guys who might not have opportunities elsewhere, like it's a good job. Stay and get your retirement, man. I met a lot of folks who their parents didn't make a lot of money, their grandparents didn't make a lot of money. The prospect of them staying in and being an E7 or an E8 with a nice retirement and a stable house for their family, it's great, man. Keep going after it. It's a good deal. And then you got your little retirement and you can start a side hustle or a different job when you get out, buy a couple houses or whatever. I mean, I'm pretty loose when it comes to what I think individuals should do. My attacks are really more on systematic things and whether retention and promotion really makes sense if the military wants to retain high performers. But as far as individual decisions, I don't really care. Do what's good for you and your family, man.
I agree. I think that's well put. If you had to take kind of what you've learned about promotion, and obviously you're self-employed now, so you've kind of like worked yourself out of all of that type of conversation, but let's say that you were to step back into the Marine Corps tomorrow, how do you think that you would incentivize high performers to stay in? Let's just say that budget and whatever is no object, if maybe money isn't even part of it, but what do you think about incentivizing people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about this in a long time. What I will say is that I think the way that we do performance reviews and performance evaluations, at least when I was in, so just for context, I was in from 05 to 13. I was an officer from 07 to 13, got out as a captain, did one tour in Iraq, one on the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit. So I was on ship for 7 months and mostly hung around the Middle East. And in my last 2 years, I was an exchange officer to the Dutch Marines, which was kind of, I don't know what you call it, but it was one of those jobs that was competitive and there was only one guy that got it every couple of years. And so I was fortunate to be able to go over there and really I served as an operations officer for an infantry battalion over there. So I had to learn Dutch, function in a very different environment, heavy NATO environment. I didn't live on a base. I lived with just me and my wife out in town and no Americans around really. So pretty cool experience. So my point is, I want to offer some context about my path. So if any of your listeners take issue with what I think about retention and promotion because I don't know anything, well, then that's fine. Maybe I just don't know enough. But what I saw was I kind of felt like the insecurities of the senior level officers that were over me really caused more downward burden than the system itself. And I know those are individual issues, but sort of at the time we were trying to quote, do more with less. Like the Marine Corps was growing, taking on tons of different responsibilities, in different theaters and basically training for every possible scenario that could have come up. We're constantly gone. Everybody's away from home all the time. And, good ideas and innovation were not rewarded, but punished. Taking care of the guys, silly things like some of our guys lived in some pretty bad squad bays while we were working up for deployment. There just wasn't enough space to put all the Marines. When I joined, we were at 185,000 and we got up to over 200,000 within a few years because we're fighting wars on a couple of fronts. Well, that means that somebody has to live in barracks that were condemned 5 years before, because we got to make room for everybody. That sucks. It's fine. Marines are okay with it. But, when someone's gear gets stolen or some weird things always happen, on base, and you try to take care of the guys, you're also trying to come up with innovative solutions for how we can make them feel safe in their barracks, whether that be cameras or whatever. And the good idea, machine gets smashed, and this is the way we've always done it kind of stuff. It just zaps your morale. It makes you not want to work hard to come up with innovative solutions, which makes you not want to stay in very long. I never expected for high performers to make more money. It's just not how the military works. It'd be awesome if it were that way, but it's just not how the military works. We had a performance evaluation cycle that came through, and at the time, the leadership that was sort of running ours stack ranked every junior officer in the battalion, which on one hand is transparent. And I appreciate that type of leadership. Like, everybody knows where they stand. But on the other hand, when you're competing for competitive billets in between deploying billets, if everybody wants the number one guy, right? Everybody wants the top guy to get selected for their individual billet. Well, if you got stack ranked as number two because the number one guy had more seniority, well, then you just became the number two guy, and it hurts your ability to compete for competitive billets throughout the system that all want number one guys, right? So it's just an odd way to reward high performance. I just think there needs to be a reworking of how promotions and retention is, arranged. Now, I will tell you, I've been out longer than I was in at this point. So somebody in your listener probably has a better handle on what exactly should be done, and probably some things have been done since then. But you can go back and look at a lot of the Marine Corps Gazette articles back from, say, 2010, 2008 to 2015. And it's like every other month, somebody's writing about how the top performers are being punished and the mediocre ones are being rewarded. So there's a lot of good stuff back there from that time period.
I want to hear about the time with the Dutch Army, or Dutch, I guess, what branch of it?
Dutch Marines, yeah. Dutch Corps.
Marines. Okay. So they actually have their own specific Marine Corps as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sounds really unique. And if you can share, I'd love to hear all about how that was, how it compared, what was like maybe the big takeaway from that time over there.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. As far as I understand, back after World War II, a lot of the Allied countries kind of got together and said, what can we do to make sure that we don't go through this again, in terms of fighting on the same front with a bunch of guys who we don't understand their language, their tactics, those sorts of things. I can only imagine. It's hard enough to communicate during wartime. I can only imagine what it must have been like when you're side by side with foreign guys. So as I understand the story, these Allied countries, the UK, Australia, the Dutch, a bunch of other countries, formed these exchanges where, kind of like, you give us a guy, we'll give you a guy for a couple of years. And it's not a liaison position in the sense that there's no State Department level tasks or any sort of, there's nothing going on other than, your guy comes and works for us, our guy goes and works for you, and they just sort of click in with whatever you're doing at the time, and they just go to work. So it was supposed to be a little bit of a gentleman's tour, in that you get over there and you kind of train with the guys, you lead a little bit, but not a ton of expectation in terms of actual producing work. It's really hard to do high level military work in a foreign language. But the Dutch Marine Corps had personnel issues, and within a few months, I became the S3 of an infantry battalion, the operations officer. And so I had real responsibility for 800 Marines, and planning, training, and some counter piracy stuff. And the Dutch military sometimes will board and secure, civilian cargo ships, around the world. So they have some cool stuff going on there. So anyway, yeah, basically I was just an infantry S3 for a Dutch infantry battalion for 2 years. Went to the Defense Language Institute for 6 months before I left in Washington, D.C. and learned Dutch. So my wife and I were married in 2009. And then I was pretty much gone training all the time and then immediately deployed. And as soon as I got back from my deployment, we hadn't, I think we'd spent probably 4 months together married, even though we'd been married for a year and a half. And we immediately went to Defense Language Institute in Washington, and they let her take the language training too. So we went from never seeing each other to sitting side by side and learning Dutch together every single day for like 6 months. It was brutal. It was brutal. They were legitimately warning us on the front end, like, we've seen divorces happen over this. So just be careful. My wife and I fortunately have had and do have a great relationship, but we have very different learning styles, and it's a very different environment. You got one teacher and 3 people sitting in a classroom for 5 hours learning Dutch. And it can be absolutely brutal. There were times where she had to have a different teacher than me because her learning style is more like osmosis, like just watch and read and talk and do as much as you can. Whereas me, I want to know the language structure. Like, tell me where the verbs are, the subjects are. I'm gonna master the structure of this. And anyway, that's how we spent the majority of our time in our early married years, was learning Dutch together. And then we moved overseas, which was pretty cool.
That sounds really unique and cool. A quick question about the Defense Language Institute. I got asked, so do they segregate you? That's part of like the curriculum, is getting you in a learning environment that is more specific to how you learn?
Yeah, kind of. So for us, there were 1, 2, 3, at least 3, maybe 4 Dutch teachers at DLI East. So the Defense Language Institute has a big presence in Monterey, California, and then a small presence in DC. And at least the ones in DC, they're all contractors. They're all, native Dutch speakers. And they really did a good job. It was amazing training. I know there's a lot to complain about with the military, but it's a big, complex machine that has figured out how to distill down and process really good training in a lot of ways. And this was another example. I mean, we've fire hosed Dutch for 6 months and got to a working proficiency. Like, I could read the newspaper, listen to the radio, converse with a native Dutch person. I mean, it was wild. It was truly crazy. But yeah, so there were different teachers with different teaching styles. Some were more kind of structured and disciplined, which is what I needed. I needed to be able to break the language down into its parts and rebuild it, whereas my wife was more, I say osmosis, but just more experiential. She could listen and learn and talk and converse. And the more she heard it, the more she picked up. And so there were a couple of months where she had a different teacher than me because it was just better for our learning to have a different style of instruction. And it's, again, hats off to the DoD and whoever it takes to put all this together, because you don't get that opportunity very much to have tailored one-on-one or 1-on-3 training that's fit for you for a specific purpose. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, very. It's cool that they have it so tailored. And I'd imagine, like you said, if you can walk out of there in 5 or 6 months and be fluent, you're really pounding the pavement on learning quickly.
Yeah, it's exhausting. I mean, I just came off a deployment, so I've done a lot of hard stuff, was in pretty good shape. And the first 2 or 3 weeks, I just went home and fell asleep at like 4:00 in the afternoon. It was brutal on your mind, like trying to absorb a completely new language 5 hours a day is wild, but it was cool. Good training.
So after the Marine Corps, you at a point after that, I'm assuming you went and got your MBA and also worked at Goldman for a while. You talked about maybe it being fortuitous that they were running a veteran program and that may have assisted you. What was the initial, I guess, desire to go and work there, and maybe talk about how that did or didn't lead you to where you are today?
Yeah, I kind of Forrest Gumped my way into Goldman. I When we were living in Holland, I grew up in a blue collar family, great parents, and always didn't have a lot of extras. Sometimes we did, but there were also times where we were pretty, we had what we needed, but not much else. And I'm really grateful for that. Like I had a really good upbringing. About 2011, we had just gotten to Holland, and I'm a captain in the Marine Corps, and I'm trying to figure out what my next move is going to be. And the one thing I knew for sure is I don't know much about money. I just don't know anything about money. Whether I get out of the Marine Corps or stay in and grow in rank and responsibility, money and contracts and just the currencies and languages of how the world actually works, I know almost nothing about. And so I just put my head down and said, okay, it's time for me to learn about money. And I know that sounds really basic, but I just didn't know anything. And so I looked for some distance MBA programs. I found the Kelly School at Indiana University, and their program was the most competitive program I could find that fit with what I was looking for in a schedule. And so applied, I got in, and I basically got an MBA to learn about money. I knew almost nothing going into school. After about a year and trying to figure out what I'm actually going to do with this degree, there was another student who was older than me, who was an Army reservist and was working at BlackRock as a portfolio manager at the time. And I had sent him a note, and I just said, hey, what do I do with all this? Like, how do I get into finance or consulting or whatever? Like that seemed to be what people did. And so that's the road I went down. Like, well, how do I do this? And he's like, well, you need to look into these things and do all this kind of stuff. And then about 2 weeks later, he sent me a note that said, hey, you should look into this. And it was the second year that Goldman was running what they called the VIP program, the Veterans Integration Program. It was an off-cycle internship only for veterans to basically expose veterans to the world of high finance, with the intention that there would be a seat available for any of them that qualified for a job, right? Like it wasn't just a dog and pony show. They had to actually put you in a seat that had the potential for long-term employment if it worked out. Not everybody got full-time jobs, but they at least needed at least needed to have the potential. So I thought, okay, so I applied. And then I did some interviews, and I flew to New York and talked to some different folks. And this is towards me getting out and being done with my time. And I got the internship. So I told my wife, like, well, if Goldman offers you an internship, then you have to say yes. So that's what I'm going to do. And so I did that. And I started off in a real estate private equity group and worked with them for a few months. And at the end of it, by the end of it, I had met some folks in the private wealth management group, which was kind of under their investment management division. And the firm made a mistake. I don't think they're supposed to offer like one person two full-time jobs. Like somehow they gotten their wires crossed, and the real estate guys offered me a job and the investment management guys offered me a job. And I took the one that paid the most up front. And again, when Goldman Sachs offers you a full-time job, getting out of the military, and you don't really know what you're going to do with your life, you just say yes. And so I did. And I learned a ton, and I met a lot of good people. And I got let go in 2016 as part of a downsize, which was also, I was totally fine with that. It was not the environment that I wanted to be in for the long term, but I totally enjoyed it in the short term. Really grateful for the opportunity that they gave me. But yeah, I sort of just kind of stumbled into it. Doors kept opening. I kept walking through them and ended up working there for about 4 years.
You said when Goldman offers you a job, you take it. I couldn't echo that any harder. I did my undergrad in finance, and that's like our school had like somewhat a relationship with Goldman, at least the location out in Salt Lake. And that was what everybody in the entire class was vying for. and it is a very prestigious thing to go on and do that. It sounds like their downsizing was a good thing. What was the environment like that wasn't for you, as you say?
I think for me, it was probably premature. I think if I were there now, it would be different. But again, I didn't come from money, and I didn't come from a family that spent a lot of time thinking and talking about money, in the sense that, we weren't business owners. We didn't have real estate investment portfolios. We never talked about investing in the markets. It just wasn't part of our conversations. And so I had no idea. Like, I knew how to balance a checkbook and manage my personal finances, even though I didn't do a good job of it. I at least knew how. But as far as like how money works and how business and commerce occurs, I had no idea. And I mean, I knew nothing. And so, then you join the Marine Corps, which basically ensures that you know nothing about money, because you spend all your time thinking about war fighting and budget. Even though there are budgets somewhere out there in the ether, they're never a consideration. You just get stuff, right? If you need ammo, you get it. If you need trucks, you get it. If you need knee pads, you get it, especially during wartime. And so you're never conscious of budget at all. Somebody is, but I wasn't. And then transitioning from the ultimate team environment to the ultimate selfish environment it was a hard transition to make. I think on the investment banking teams, you probably have some camaraderie where guys are staying up late, all pulling for the same goal, like trying to get deals done, trying to get decks finished, trying to get, whatever. But private wealth, particularly as a new private wealth advisor, there's nobody on your team. Like, they don't want you to get fired. They don't want you to do a bad job, but like, you're pretty much on your own. Like, your job is to go find rich people and make them clients of Goldman Sachs. Like, that's it. And you don't really have a team that is as aligned with your growth as you are. And so, in fact, you might have folks that, if you were to get a fish close to the boat, might try to take the fish off your line. And so, and I have no bitterness toward it at all, but I just had a real hard time with, again, the striking contrast between the ultimate team environment, where you would literally die for the people that you're working with, and the opposite, when you're kind of on your own and people would probably rather you die so they can get the stuff that you've been working on.
Mm-hmm.
And I met good people there, but I was probably premature. I'm still learning finance. Like, again, 2 years prior, I knew literally nothing about money. And my education in money was an MBA, which is all theoretical and abstract. And then you get into like real money with working for Goldman. Like, I had a hard transition. I met great people. I did fine. And I wasn't bad at my job particularly, but it absolutely was like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I here? Why did I choose to be here? Do I really want to be here? Is this what God made me for? Or like, what am I even doing here? Like, there's a lot of that going on.
It would seem to me that the kind of solo act that you had of like kind of being responsible for yourself and you're on your own, it must not have been like too off-putting to you. And I'm curious maybe how your thoughts about that have changed, because now you're like a small business owner, and like you're the one bringing home the bacon, so to speak, for yourself.
Yeah.
And if you're not working, then that's not good. Do you think that being like personally responsible and accountable for that week to week, is that good for you and good for people maybe in general?
That's a good question. For me, there are times that I like it. I like the autonomy. I like shouldering the burden of providing for my family. But at the same time, I'm 41. I'm about to be 42. I've got 3 kids, and my wife and I are committed to her not working and being with the kids while they're in their early formative years. And so that brings about a different set of risk factors when it comes to what is good employment. So in December, my wife got really sick for a few weeks and I couldn't work. I had to pick up some slack at home. I mean, she was real sick. So no, like put a movie on for the kids and I'll just kind of make it. I mean, she was like down and out. So I didn't work and I didn't make any money. And that really freaked me out in a way, because the same could be true for me. Like if I'm our sole breadwinner and I'm the one that's actually fixing stuff in people's homes, I have a home repair handyman business. Well, if I don't work, we don't eat. And so it did sort of, there's two directions that I could take my company. I could hire a bunch of guys and try to grow the business, take on trucks and guides and insurance, and try to kind of grow out this kind of typical home services business. Or you can make a pretty fair amount of money just being a solo handyman and driving around fixing people's stuff. It's actually better than most people would think. But again, what's the Rodney gets hit by a bus plan? Like what happens when, like, my wife is taking risk? She's putting all her chips in the center of the table that I'm going to provide and that she's going to be with the kids. Well, if something happens, what is she going to do then? And so I think that's a risk I'm less willing to take at my age, and particularly with the way that our family works. And so I'm kind of at a crossroads when it comes to, how do I want to grow out the business? I've got other opportunities that are kind of floating around out there as well that are not home repair related. They're sort of more related to my corporate experience. Is there some combination of a corporate role and running this on the side, or hiring a GM and sort of having a semi-passive income stream out there that's growing? Because it is an asset that I've built. It has some value to it. So those are, I don't know. I spend a fair amount of time on Twitter. I'm a little bit on a break right now, but for your listeners, I wonder how many people hear about actual day-to-day business ownership, career decisions. There's a lot of theories out there and a lot of, I only want to work for myself. Well, that's fine. But my primary responsibility is not my autonomy. It's my family's provision. My family's provision is bigger than me and bigger than my autonomy and bigger than what I think living the good life is in terms of my profession. The good life is they're provided for, and, I don't have to worry.
You hear all these stories of entrepreneurship and people taking these wild risks, and it somehow like always comes to this story of, I'm thinking of one in particular, like he quit his job to like start working on his own, and he had a year's worth of savings to kind of figure it out. And it wasn't until there was 3 months left of savings to really, like, that's what it took to turn on the gas and actually start doing something and making money, and with a family to provide for. And it's really like sexy to hear those things. And it is really enticing to be like, yeah, like I want to be responsible for it. But like you said, when you've got a family that's relying on you, I know for myself, I've got my firstborn on the way. And like as soon as that happened, it was like, oh, this just turned on a switch of thinking about this in a much different way. It's not, just me and my wife who has a full-time job anymore. It's like, oh no, there's other people that are relying on it. And I really like what you said about how, yeah, I maybe want this sort of autonomy, but my family and providing for them ranks above that still.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I were single, I could live out of a bag. I mean, I did for like a decade of my life. Like, who cares? You know what I mean? Like, if I'd probably put all my chips in multiple times. And when I lose them all, I'll be camping for a while until I build them back up again. But I can't do that anymore. My wife has less of a pain tolerance than I am when it comes to living under a bridge. And so it's just irresponsible for me to, I mean, part of manhood is being willing to take responsibility for someone else, for wife and children, which means self-sacrifice. It always, always, always means self-denial in some way. And so when you try to marry getting everything that I want and giving everything that she wants, there's always going to be a conflict. And I don't view that as I don't view that conflict as reducing my dignity as a person. Like the greatest men I know are marked by the sacrifices they made for their country, for their family, for their kids, whatever it may be, for their employees. And so I don't want to limit. I'm not limiting myself by sacrificing for my family. It's just not in the cards for me to take big risk. Now, we're not risk takers, but at the same time, putting all your chips in for a business idea where, if we're honest with ourselves, has more to do with our own autonomy than it does the idea itself, like that's just a risk I'm not willing to take right now. I'm not trading my family's provision for my own autonomy. So my point is, I have a lot of leadership experience. The corporate options that may be on the table are in leadership areas. And so it's not like it's not like I'm going to be limited. Like, I'm going to have the ability to go do good work still. But, this whole online argument about whether you're an entrepreneur or have a W-2, like who cares, man? Like, go get your W-2 and provide for your family. It's not a big deal, or if your idea is working and your family's all on board that you're going to go for it, well, then go for it. Who cares? Like, do that too.
I've certainly found myself in that debate and thinking about it for myself. And maybe it is one of those weird kind of mental masturbation things. Like, you're talking through something and it's more just like the obsession with the idea rather than just thinking about like, hey, like what actually is the most important thing?
Yeah.
And
well, I'll tell you
taking
this,
care of
and
the
this would be
family
hard.
or whatever.
Yeah. I'll tell you, for you, this might be hard because you're kind of building an online presence, but the healthiest thing that I've done is get offline. Like if I need to make a decision about something big in my life and it requires clarity and focus, I get offline. Like, I completely unplug for a month to make sure that I'm actually seeing things correctly, that the competing voices and I'm a pretty independent guy, but none of us are immune to desiring other people's approval and aligning with certain voices online, trying to build your brand, whatever it is. Like, I do it too. But ultimately, those people don't care about me and they don't care about my family as much as I do. And so I unplug and make sure that I'm making the decisions using the actual information that is right in front of me, as opposed to just the talking nonsense of the Twitter sphere. And there's a lot of great people I've met on there, but none of them can provide clarity about what I'm supposed to do about my family or my future. It's just a lot of opinions that's just flying around into the ether. And by the way, they're all filtered, right? Like, they're all giving you the thing that they have carefully crafted to put online. They have not given you the whole story. And so when you see 100 of them or 1,000 of them a day, there's just no way for you to use that information to your benefit when you're trying to make a big decision for your family. So I have found when I need to make a decision, I get offline. I usually find quite a bit of focus and peace and clarity.
How do you think about finding peers and building relationships? Now, we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording about meeting in person and things like that. And I know over the last couple of years, my entrance into doing kind of the social media thing, but then also trying to connect with other vets amidst the pandemic and like just not living near people that you're friends with, it has really forced me into spending time online. And I've gained a lot of satisfaction and just made so many great connections and stuff on Twitter and all these other places. And I think it's been to fill that gap of not having kind of that close group anymore. And so it's hard for me to think about giving it up, even though I believe that everything that you're saying is accurate. What do you do and how do you think about bringing and getting in the vicinity of other smart people in terms of accountability, your work, maybe other men in terms of kind of just friends that are also family men or having similar issues on that, not issues, but talking through things that you're going through? What do you do for that?
First of all, it's not intentional, really, but It is. So I have a pretty small, close circle of friends. I don't have 100 friends or even 25. I mean, when I say friends, I mean the type of community that you're sort of talking about, like a peer group that holds you accountable, you can share with. You're kind of, whatever, your ride or dies. Like you're the ones who are going to be there regardless of what your address is, your career path, whatever. A very small group of those people. For me, I think you have to I think you have to decide what's most important in your life and anchor your peer group from that idea. For me, it's my faith. It governs not only everything that I do, but it governs the way the world works. And I believe it wholeheartedly. So my peers, my closest peers, are the ones who share my convictions about the way the world works through our faith. And they may not be in home repair, they may not be wealthy, they may not be online, they may not be, whatever. But if my life changes, they're going to be there, right? Like if you form a peer group of real estate professionals because you're going after a real estate career and then you don't, well, then what happens? Like what happens to your group of peers? So I think the first thing is you really need to distill down to what is the singular thing that my entire existence rests on, and who else feels that way, and where are they? How do I find them? For me, it's in the church, and that doesn't mean that every church you go to they're going to be there. But I've been fortunate enough over the past few years to have met folks like this. And, my wife and I, our family, we have, a very small handful of people that are, regardless of what they're up to, what we're up to, that are going to be there. And so that's actually my peer group and my accountability group. They probably have nothing to help me. They have nothing to say about my home repair business or what I should do or how I should be thinking about my company. But I don't care. Like I can figure that out. I am not short on ideas and I know where to get them if I need them. What you really need is support. And what you really need is to know that like your existence has value and they're going to see that in you and reinforce that regardless of whether you're high or low on any particular day or month. And so if you're not into church, I'm not totally sure where you would go, but like probably something in your community, something that, in your neighborhood or whatever that has anchored a bunch of people together for the same reasons. I'm skeptical of the online stuff. I think I don't, it's just going to be really difficult to build long-term authentic community online. I think a lot of guys out there have said they have, and I don't doubt it. I've met good people online. I've met people online who I know I'll know in 20 years, totally fine, but they don't live where I live. And if a tornado hits my city, they're not going to be here. You know what I mean? And that's okay. I wouldn't expect them to. If, something tragic happens in my family, they're not going to be here. They're going to send thoughts and prayers, and I think they're probably authentic in doing it, but they're not going to be here. I think we're meant to be in authentic in-person community with other humans, regardless of how advanced we get technologically. It's no secret that we're as connected as ever in human history and also just as lonely. We are a lonely society that has more ways of connecting than ever any other time in human history. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. Like that, the online thing has a lot of benefits and I benefit greatly from it. But deep, authentic human connection is an area where it'll fall short ultimately. I know that might be a hot take, but you don't have to look far to see that play itself out in our society. And so anybody who has an online presence who's also feeling lonely at the same time, I would still implore them to get offline for a little bit. Even if you're not a believer, man, just go to your local church. Somebody there will be kind enough to hang with you for a little bit and just try to meet folks locally.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that you starting to see it play out in online thing where people are like, oh, we need to. There's a reason why some of the most top performing companies work in person and are calling their people back to the office. Is they need that kind of camaraderie. And I know we're a little bit partial to the camaraderie probably that the military gave us, and I don't think that we're going to have an online military anytime soon. So I think that there is something to that.
Cool. Yeah.
I would love to talk about your home repair business. Why get going into this?
I was leaving Dallas and moving to Tulsa. Kind of to your story earlier, I had some income and about a year's worth of kind of provision, and that I knew I had a little bit of runway to kind of not have to try to find a job or whatever right away. When I left the military in 2013, we rented, but then we bought our first house, in 2015. And immediately upon becoming a homeowner, I started looking for people to fix my house. I needed a new back door. I needed a patio cover, just basic things. I could not get people to come do work. It was driving me crazy. I had to beg these companies to come build me a patio, and they just wouldn't do it. Like, they would no show. They wouldn't, like, I couldn't get people to come give estimates. I'd try to pay them a fee, like, hey, just tell me how much it costs just to get you to come over here. I'm totally fine paying it. And they would just no show. Or, Barney's Electrical would come over and he stinks and he's like, can't talk. And you're like, what is going on here? Like, why am I begging these terrible companies for me to give them money? Why is this so hard? And at the time I was still working for Goldman, but I told my wife, I said, look, if I ever had the opportunity to be in residential services, I'm going to kill it. And all I'm going to do is do what I say I'm going to do and speak like a normal human and have a clean and neat appearance. And it's going to be awesome. This is in 2015. So this was several years ago. Well, I finally had, and I've been fixing my own stuff for a long time. I'm a big DIY proponent. I just think we need to be able to fix our own stuff. I mean, I don't know how we've gotten to this place where we feel entitled to a safe and comfortable existence when we don't know how to provide any of our own food or shelter at all. Just think about that. Like, we have no idea how to grow our own food. We have no idea how to provide our own shelter. I mean, we're like house cats. Like, we would die in the wild for the most part. And so it's always been a part of what I want to do, is just to know how to provide for myself, both monetarily, but also physically. So anyway, I had some time and I got here in Tulsa, and I just said, I'm doing it. I'm going to rip it. I'm going to start fixing stuff for money and just see what happens. So I went out and got on Nextdoor and all these different sites and threw my hat in the ring, told a few people what I was doing, and started working. And I made a few $1,000s. And then I started doing a little bit more and a little bit more. And then I branded it. And I just kind of wanted to see if I have a neat, clean brand that communicates itself well, and I show up with a neat appearance, and I tell people what I can and can't do, and I do it on time, and I charge a fair but high price, like I priced myself at the top of the market, could I have a business? And so I backed into what I wanted to make per year if I had to do it by myself. And I found a price that way. Like, basically, if I had to lower my prices to do this job, I would just do something else. I don't want to. There's a certain amount of money I want to make. And so this is the price I'm going to charge. And if people stop paying me, then I'll just go do something else. And it works. A year later, here we are, we're still doing it. And the business is growing. And the underlying sort of idea is that I think our country is coming into awareness that we are woefully short on tradespeople, people who can fix things for money. And I refuse to acknowledge that. I don't want to look up when I'm 80 and there's nobody to fix my air conditioner and I didn't do anything about it. And so I'm partially going after young men and trying to offer them a career path that is maybe different than what they've been hearing for the past 5 years. Like you can make money learning to fix stuff. In fact, you can do pretty well if you learn to fix stuff. And so not only am I just trying to fix stuff for money and make a living for my family, but I'm also trying to build a business that can provide opportunities for young men to go and work with their hands. Not everybody should go to college. It's just not, the value proposition isn't there for everybody. And so that's kind of what I'm up to.
What do you think have been the most significant hurdles to you starting this? We were talking a bit before we started recording about what competition looks like, and you kind of have alluded to the fact that the current operators in the market where you're living are not great, and that's probably representative of where it is or what it's like everywhere. What do you think have been your biggest challenges?
I would say bootstrapping a company like this and going from 0 to 1. I know that's a little bit of a buzzy word in the corporate America, but it's true. Like this time last year, there was not a thing. Like my business didn't exist, and now it's a thing. And going from 0 to like a side hustle, like you kind of go from nothing to a hobby to a side hustle to like a real job to a company. Bootstrapping this type of business to a real company is very, very hard, like very hard, in the sense that, you know, you need revenue and cash flow coming in order to afford growth, like to buy trucks, to buy tools, to buy more insurance, to pay more guys. But in order to get that revenue, I have to be doing work. So I have to be fixing toilets and building decks and patching, drywall in order to generate the cash flow needed to grow. But then I have to be doing the thinking and the strategic work can build growth, right? And so doing both is unbelievably difficult. I consider myself a fairly high capacity guy, and it's probably the hardest thing I've tried to do, which is bootstrap this company into something that is an actual growth engine. I think there's a lot of merits to buying a business that already exists, like a lot of merits. I think bootstrapping a home repair business without taking on debt or equity, it's not that it's impossible. I just don't know if it makes a lot of sense. It's really difficult to do it the way that I'm doing it. Again, to your point with the competition thing, there aren't a lot of great guys out there that do what I do. And even though there are some, and I know some of them, none of us compete with each other at all. I mean, there is so much demand and so little supply that if you want to get into the handyman home repair game, now's the time. Like, there's no better time, because you will not compete with anybody. And everything that you need to know how to do is on YouTube. So if you are, you can't know everything. And so I spend an ungodly amount of hours on YouTube. I used to, I'm a little less so now, but learning different techniques, learning about different materials, learning about different types of tape or caulking or paint or whatever, so that you can do a good job. But it's all there. It's all there for free. You can find anything you want on the internet. And if you have a home, then you can go in your garage and you can punch a hole in your own drywall and you can patch it until it looks right. And now you're a drywaller. Like, now you can do it. And so for guys who don't know what they want to do and they really like tools and know their way around tools, it's a pretty good opportunity to get out there and just start fixing stuff for money. If not for anything, then do it for a side hustle. Do it on Saturdays,
When I found entrepreneurship, I kind of went back to my dad, who used to be an HVAC guy before he kind of started off on his main career. And he still kind of does HVAC work on the side. And I asked him, I said, why didn't you, you're obviously really good at this. Like, why not run with this and like kind of grow it up and build it up? And he said, the thing about this type of work is, if you're going to do it, it's either just going to be you or you need a lot of people, because when you're the one doing the work, you have nobody out looking for the next job. And when you finish that, you need to have something else that's lined up. What do you think about the size of businesses that are relevant in your space? Like, is it really just a single guy operation, or you need to be kind of the next scale and there's kind of a gray or like a dead zone in between there?
Yeah, it's a really good. I'm glad you said that. I said on another podcast, and I think this is totally true. You're either solo or you need like five guys. And when I say five, I mean five trucks, five vans in out in the community doing work. Because when you're solo, you can structure your company really simply. Insurance is really cheap. You can you can run a pretty lean organization. I hired a guy recently that now I had to let go already after 6 weeks. And he was a good guy, but unfortunately, there were some things he kind of represented that he could do that he couldn't totally do. And I don't think he was being dishonest. I think he just had a different interpretation of the standard than I did. That's okay. So it just didn't work. But one guy now has a full salary. Now he needs a truck, and you got to brand that truck. And you now have your insurance now goes up. You've got general liability. I carry insurance for my tools and equipment, and then workers' comp. You have to add that. All these different things. Now all of a sudden you're paying payroll taxes to the state. You're reporting all this stuff. So the risk and the work and the financial input increases disproportionate to the level of revenue that one guy can generate. So you really need to try to get to five guys quickly or stay solo, I think. And is it four? Is it five? Is it six? Is it three? I don't know, but it's definitely more than one extra guy. Like you need to do it quickly, because, this one guy, like one mistake, and all of a sudden you've now unwound 3 or 4 days worth of revenue that he could provide for you. Right. So there's really no room for this one guy to make a lot of mistakes. Whereas if you have 4 or 5 guys out there, one guy makes a mistake, you're still making enough money. You can absorb that. You can train them. You can take them off the field, train them for a little bit and put them back out. So I think your dad is totally right. You either need to work solo, which comes with its own risk, like I talked about earlier, or you need to ramp up quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge to ramping up quickly is you need good guys. Like you're now the opportunity that presented itself when you first started the company. Hey, there's nobody out there doing this work really well. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. Well, when you need to hire 5 guys, guess what? There's nobody out there doing this work really well. And it's hard to hire 5 guys. So yeah, that's the challenge that I face right now.
Would you put yourself in the bucket of trying to decide which way you're going to go?
Totally.
Have you kind of made up your mind?
I've made up my mind that I'm not going to do this solo. Based on what I said earlier. I mean, what happens if I break my arm? Like my wife doesn't work. She's with our kids all day, and I need to generate income every day. If I break my arm, if I cut my hand with a saw, if we get some crazy 3 weeks of rain or something that I can't do outside jobs, like there's a lot of risk in the early stages of being a solo handyman. And we don't have an expensive lifestyle, but we are trying to save money, and we just bought some property, and could I make 25% less than what I'm trying to make right now? Yeah, I could, but I don't want to. So the solo thing is probably not the option I'm going to go with. So what I'm really trying to decide is, do I take some of the more corporate opportunities that have presented themselves that are more in my leadership, executive sort of skill set, and then run this on the side, hire a GM, or do I shut it down? I'm just not totally sure. I think I'm gonna try to keep it if I can. But again, I've talked with some guys about equity, and do we raise money and borrow money and just throw the kitchen sink at it and try to grow this thing as quickly as possible? Or do I just keep it as a side hustle, run some part-time guys out there? We do work when we can, and clip a few $1,000s a month in addition to what I'm doing in the corporate, world. I don't know. I haven't really figured that out. I'm literally working that out as we speak, which is why I'm offline right now.
I was gonna ask why you were on your Twitter hiatus, but that's a good reason to be. There were a couple of people pinging you on Twitter asking where you were, and I was like, I'm talking to him this week, so I'll have to ask him. What's your opposition to the kitchen sink strategy? I'd love to just kind of pick your brain on what you're, as you're working through it, maybe talking through it out loud with somebody might be helpful. What is your thoughts and or feelings about raising money and doing that way?
I don't have an opposition to it per se. It's more just kind of the return on headache. Like is this what I want to do? Like, is it, every new hire comes with new training, new processes, undoing mistakes, vans, branding, workers' comp, just stuff. I mean, it's hard, right? Like, look at any of the operators that are, our community that we met in was sort of the Twitter or the small business Twitter group. Look at some of these guys that are actual operators and not searchers, but operators of local service companies, plumbing, HVAC, whatever. They're going to tell you that it's hard. Like, it's really hard. And I would argue that it's much harder to grow a mature company quickly than it is to buy a company that already exists and turn it around. Yes, you have taken a lot of financial risk by putting yourself under a, personal guarantee with an SBA loan or whatever, but you're ultimately stepping into a company that functions, right? Like it functions. It has processes in place. You're doing a few $1,000,000 a year in revenue. There are earnings for which you can make your debt payments. You can pay yourself a little bit. You can make some problems go away. That's a very different equation than creating something, building something. And building and creating sounds attractive. I think we've overplayed that in our cultural obsession with Silicon Valley types. Like, building stuff sucks. Like flat out, like it really sucks. It's really hard to keep pushing the rock up the hill. And I'm enjoying it. I'm not opposed to doing sucky things at all. But again, all these sort of never W-2 entrepreneur maxis are like, I just don't align with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when you're in the stage of business that I'm in, where everything is hard, nothing comes easy, and taking on money means taking on partners, taking on scrutiny, taking on having to defend your ideas every day when it comes to what you're going to do about growth. Whereas right now, I don't defend my ideas to anybody. Taking all that on, I'm 41, I've got 3 kids and a wife that doesn't work by design, or a corporate job that pays more than what I'm going to make in the next 5 years, right? Like, what's really back to our earlier conversation, like what am I really doing when it comes to choosing entrepreneurship over that environment, a challenging and stable income stream? Like, pride, wanting to say that I did it. I think every man probably has something inside of him that he wants to know that he can make the grade, that he can measure up when the time comes, when the time counts, whatever. I think we feel that in entrepreneurship. Like, we just want to be able to say that we did it. We want to be able to put an idea that's in our head into practice, and it actually works. Like, that's a very, I'm not saying women don't do it, because they do, but that's a very manly thing to want, like to be able to bring an idea to fruition and it actually works. And I feel that too. But again, I have to put my desires aside, at least to some extent, and make sure that I'm providing for my family. And one of the measures of that is, what's the return on hassle and what's the risk reward when you're holding massive amounts of pain getting this thing up the curve, and certainly challenges, but sort of a more corporate opportunity. It's literally what I'm trying to figure out right now. I don't totally know. And nothing is set in stone. My company could die tomorrow. So could some of these opportunities. So there's a little bit of time too, where you're just trying to figure out, okay, what's the next step? What doors are open? What doors are closed? And we're never going to have perfect information. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, it's just, what do I want to do? And there may not be any justification for it other than just, I think this is what I want to do. This is the thing that's going to get me out of bed and producing every day for my family.
I really like your approach to it. And I think it's very different than a lot of people talk about it. And you've even yourself highlighted that it's maybe not what the mainstream consensus idea about entrepreneurship is, but it is very personal. It's not, there is no end all be all answer on some of these things. And even if there is, the idea of just your own self-selection and what you think might be fun kind of can sway that very quickly.
Yeah. And I have a supportive wife and she wants me to go after what I want to do. It's hard to be productive when you don't want to get out of bed and do the thing that you're supposed to do that day. So it's not like I'm completely giving up autonomy and choice. Like I want to go after what I want to go after, but within reason. Like I don't play golf every day. I don't go hunting on hunting trips. I don't just jack around, I like work, but I still need to have energy for the work that I put my hand to. Otherwise it'll be miserable and I probably won't be super productive. So I like everything that's in front of me. I'm certainly fortunate to have options. I know there's a lot of people that don't have choices. So that's not lost on me. I'm really grateful for it. What I decide to do and what form it takes, I'm not totally sure. I'm going to keep Mr. Home Repair no matter what. I mean, it's just to what level of scale and involvement in my own day-to-day. That's kind of what I have to figure out.
The last thing that I want to talk about with Mr. Home Repair is this offer that you have up on Gumroad. You have a free download for how to outfit like trucks and like everything that you would need to basically start a home repair business tomorrow if you wanted to. Why put this up?
I don't even know if anybody's even downloaded it. Maybe you did. I don't know. I think partially because in my little Twitter sphere, one of the angles that I'm going after is, well, let me back up. I joined Twitter and started using it actively for my own education. So I use Twitter to train myself to write better copy, to get ideas in my head onto paper in concise bits that work well on the side of a truck or on a mailer or on a website or in emails to employees, whatever it may be. It's my own way of training myself to write better and more concise copy. But in order to do that, you sort of need an angle or something. And so basically I write about the home repair business, but particularly from the entrepreneur side. And what has popped out of it is a bunch of guys who, probably have smaller Twitter accounts or whatever, but they're in different cities and they're interested in maybe starting their own home repair business or having a handyman thing on the side, or I get DMs all the time. How should I get started? So part of my reason for putting that on Gumroad is because I think people would want it. For two, I don't know how to use Gumroad. And so if I ever want to monetize what I know, whether that be playbooks, processes, the home repair business, helping people start their own, whatever, I need a channel, a distribution channel. And so I just sort of tested Gumroad to see if I could throw something out there that people would find helpful. And the van loadout is just something that I was already working on. I have to do it anyway for my business. And so because of this guy I hired and buying a new van, I just forced myself to put together a loadout. And while I had it, I thought, well, let's just throw it up and let's just see if anybody wants it. And then I kind of didn't really advertise it. So I'm a little surprised you found it. I just sort of put it on my profile. But yeah, I'm a tinkerer. I like messing with stuff. I'm always looking for different ways to monetize things that are in my head that have taken me time to come by that might have value to someone else. I didn't put a price on that. I just figured I would see if I could exercise the muscle of putting something onto paper that someone might want to download themselves. And then I've got other stuff that I can add later and charge for it, maybe. Who knows?
No, that's great. And that's exactly kind of was what I was anticipating. And I'm glad that you did that. I think that represents kind of another level of thinking in terms of like why we do what we do. And I think it also serves to and as a good reminder that many of the things that we do seem obvious, but you don't know how many people are in need of what you know. And like, that's one of the reasons why I keep coming back to Twitter. It's just a lot of people that are willing to give their knowledge and share and to teach. So I appreciate you doing that. I think that that's really cool. And I'm excited to see what you continue to put out there.
Cool.
My final question for you would be, what is it that we can learn from you that we could implement in our lives today?
So this is going to be a road that is completely different than everything we've gone down today. But I've spent a lot of time outside the military talking to guys who, have struggled when they got out. I'm constantly talking to guys who are having a hard time with their marriage, with work, with whatever. The one thing that I've noticed particularly with American men, is there's this tension that they sit in with wanting their life to be one way and it's turning out a different way. And they don't love it in terms of they wish they had a different job. They wish they had more money. They don't love their marriage. Life just isn't giving them what they were promised or how they thought it would be, particularly with married men. And I'm only saying this because it's been on my mind. I've talked to a few guys the last few days that are in this bucket. Guys need to understand that, like, if you're married, you should put everything you have into having a healthy marriage, because a healthy marriage supports and blesses and accelerates every other part of your life. It's the best thing that you can offer your kids. The best thing that you can offer your children for the entirety of their lives is your healthy marriage. Hands down. Nothing will have a bigger impact on your kids' lives. The best thing you can offer your community, whether it's your neighbors, your church, your gym, whatever it is your own healthy marriage. I know that sounds bizarre, but I'm just telling you, you're going to have one listener that the light bulb comes on and gets what I'm talking about. Like, subordinating everything to a healthy marriage will cause everything to flourish, hands down. And so if guys are trying to figure out what's the next step, what do I do with me? What am I going to do with my company? What am I going to do about these other opportunities? What am I going to do about this, about that? What is my responsibility to my marriage, and what decision puts that most at risk? That decision is off the field, flat out. Like, the most attractive option I have is driving around in my truck and fixing people's stuff. I'm only responsible for myself, and my day-to-day is pretty easy. Like, I just take customer calls, I drive over there, I fix their stuff, and I go home. It's very simple, and I can make a decent living at it. But it's the decision that puts my family most at risk when it comes to providing for them, because I'm the only one generating income. And if I don't fix something that day, we don't eat. And so I can't do it, even though it's actually the most attractive option I have. I would just say, what can your audience learn from me that maybe they aren't hearing anywhere else? I'm just telling you, if you're a married dude, put all your chips in the center of the table on your marriage, and it will pay you back 100-fold without question.
I appreciate you saying that. Honestly, I might have been the person that needed to hear that. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
My last thing, what can myself and or the listeners do to be useful to you? Anywhere you want to send them? Anybody in Tulsa that might be in need of some home repair? What can we do for you?
Oh, man. Appreciate that. I would just say, I'm going to keep writing. I'm going to keep doing stuff on Twitter. I just don't know what yet. Obviously, I've got an account and I'll keep writing about home repair stuff, but I'm generally just interested in business, leadership, interpersonal stuff like what I just talked about. So send everybody to my Twitter account at Rod Repairs, and we'll work it out from there.
Fantastic. I'll have that link in the show notes as well. Rodney, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks, Brock.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you. and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.